Imagine being judged not by your actions but by the color of your skin. In a world where prejudice runs deep, one young man chooses the path of kindness instead of revenge. What happens when the person who hurt him is in desperate need of help? Will hate continue, or will love and forgiveness prevail? This is a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the power of the heart. It's about overcoming pain to become something greater. It's about showing the world that true strength lies not in our anger, but in our compassion. Stay tuned as we witness an extraordinary journey of redemption and transformation. A man proves that actions speak louder than words, and that kindness can break down any wall. Ready to see how one simple act can change everything? Let's dive in. Welcome back, my Alcott Stories channel family, and a big hello to all the new faces joining us today. If you're here for deep stories about love, resilience, and the power of the human spirit, you're in the right place. This is where we learn, grow, and inspire each other. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can spread these powerful messages together. The university campus buzzed with life, its sprawling grounds dotted with students from diverse backgrounds. Among them was Marcus, a young black man, whose presence was unassuming, yet profound. He navigated the corridors with a quiet determination, carrying the weight of his circumstances with grace. Born into poverty, Marcus had learned resilience from a young age. His days were a delicate balance of rigorous classes and long shifts at a nearby diner, where he worked to pay for tuition and support his family. Despite his hardships, Marcus had an innate warmth that drew people in. He was the kind of person who held doors open, remembered the names of janitors, and offered a smile to anyone who crossed his path. His classmates often took his kindness for granted, dismissing him as just another quiet figure in the background. Yet Marcus harbored dreams as grand as the towering buildings on campus. He envisioned a life where his education would not only uplift him, but also allow him to uplift others in his community. In his economics class sat Emily, a vision of grace and beauty. With her flowing blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, she was the epitome of privilege. Her father, a successful businessman, had ensured that Emily never wanted for anything. She walked through life with an air of confidence, her head held high, oblivious to the struggles of those like Marcus. Emily was not unkind, but she was sheltered. She had grown up in a bubble where challenges were abstract concepts rather than lived experiences. Her world revolved around designer clothes, luxurious vacations, and the admiration of her peers. To her, the idea of poverty was distant, a topic discussed in lectures or seen in documentaries, not something that existed in her immediate circle. For Marcus, Emily was more than just beautiful. She was a symbol of everything he had never experienced: a life of ease, a sense of belonging, and the ability to dream without the constraints of survival. He watched her from afar, not with envy, but with admiration. Her laughter was like music, her presence radiant. She often spoke animatedly in class, her opinions reflecting her privileged perspective, yet Marcus found himself drawn to her enthusiasm. He never imagined himself worthy of her attention. His admiration was silent, a secret he guarded fiercely. He didn't resent her privilege. Instead, he saw in her a possibility, a connection that transcended their vastly different worlds. His heart would quicken whenever she walked into the room, her presence filling the space with light. Though Marcus longed to bridge the gap between them, he remained hesitant. What could he offer someone like Emily? His torn sneakers and second-hand books seemed to scream his unworthiness. Yet, beneath his self-doubt was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps kindness and sincerity could mean more than wealth and status. Unbeknownst to Emily, Marcus's quiet admiration had begun to influence his actions. He would arrive early to class to secure a seat near her, secretly cherishing the moments when their eyes met, even fleetingly. He often found himself lingering on her words during discussions, not because he agreed, but because he valued the way she expressed herself. To Marcus, Emily represented both a dream and a challenge. She was a reminder of the disparities that defined their world, but also a testament to the beauty that could exist within it. In his heart, he believed that love, at its core, could transcend barriers of race, class, and privilege. Yet he knew that in a world as divided as theirs, such beliefs would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Would his humility and kindness be enough to bridge the divide? Or would the harsh realities of their society render his dreams unattainable? For now, Marcus contented himself with admiring Emily from afar, unaware of the storm that lay ahead. For weeks, Marcus wrestled with the feelings that had taken root in his heart. The affection he felt for Emily was no longer something he could ignore. He had spent countless nights thinking about her, convinced that his sincerity might break through the barriers of class and color that separated them. In his mind, love was a force that transcended such boundaries, a belief he clung to despite the realities of the world around him. One crisp afternoon, after a particularly engaging class discussion, Marcus decided that he could no longer keep his feelings hidden. The classroom had emptied, save for a few lingering students packing their bags. Emily was chatting with a friend near the window, her laughter as bright as the sunlight streaming in. Marcus's heart raced as he approached her, his palms damp with sweat and his voice caught in his throat. "Emily," he said softly, barely able to meet her eyes. She turned, surprised to see him. "Yes, Marcus. What is it?" His classmates, sensing something unusual, paused their conversations to watch. The room grew eerily quiet. Marcus felt the weight of their stares but pressed on, his resolve outweighing his fear. I just wanted to tell you something," he began, his voice trembling. "I've admired you for a long time. You're smart, kind, and beautiful. I know we're different in so many ways, but I can't help how I feel. I love you, Emily." The words hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her response. He had envisioned this moment so many times, hoping she might see past their differences and recognize the depth of his feelings. Emily's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, and then to something far colder. A cruel smirk spread across her lips as she stepped back, her voice laced with derision. "You love me?" she scoffed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you even realize who you're talking to? Look at yourself, Marcus. You're black. You're poor. And you think someone like me would ever be interested in someone like you?" Marcus's eyes widened, her words cutting through him like a blade. Before he could respond, Emily raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed in the room, followed by a stunned silence. The other students, who had been watching intently, erupted into laughter. Some whispered to each other, their eyes filled with mockery. Marcus's face burned with shame, his vision blurring with unshed tears. "Next time," Emily sneered, "look in the mirror before you embarrass yourself like this." Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The weight of the humiliation was unbearable. He turned and walked out of the classroom, his steps heavy and unsteady. As he exited the building, the crisp air stung his tear-streaked face. He kept walking, past the campus gates, past the streets he had come to know, until he found himself in a quiet park. There, beneath the shelter of a towering oak tree, Marcus let himself break. He cried, not just for the rejection, but for the cruel reminder of his place in a world that judged him for things he couldn't change. The following day, Marcus didn't return to class, nor did he come back the day after that. He withdrew from the university entirely, unable to face the stares, whispers, and laughter of his peers. The dreams he had worked so hard for felt distant, almost unreachable. He returned to his modest neighborhood, his spirit bruised but his heart still beating. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his quiet departure from the university marked the beginning of a journey far greater than he could have imagined. a path that would eventually lead him to a place of healing, redemption, and unexpected heroism. Marcus returned to his small one-bedroom apartment with the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The space, already modest, felt suffocating in his despair. The dim light from a single bulb flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the room. He dropped his bag by the door, slumped onto the worn-out couch, and let the tears he had been holding back fall freely. In the silence, his sobs echoed off the walls. His mind replayed the events of the classroom over and over, each iteration cutting deeper into his heart. He had poured his soul into that confession, believing that sincerity might be enough. Instead, he had been met with cruelty, not just from Emily, but from a world that seemed to conspire against him at every turn. "What's wrong with me?" he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "Why am I not enough?" He looked around his apartment at the peeling paint and second-hand furniture, reminders of his struggles and sacrifices. On the table lay his stack of books, once symbols of his aspirations, now relics of a dream that felt hopelessly out of reach. Marcus had always believed that hard work and kindness could overcome anything, but in that moment, his faith wavered. For days, he barely left the apartment. Food lost its taste, and the world outside seemed indifferent to his pain. He avoided his phone, knowing it might contain messages from classmates who had witnessed his humiliation. The shame was too much to bear. Eventually, the practicalities of life forced Marcus to act. Bills needed to be paid, and he had no family wealth to fall back on. Swallowing his pride, he returned to the diner where he had worked part-time during university. His manager, a kind older woman named Ms. Lorraine, welcomed him back without question. "Life knocks us down sometimes, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle. "But you've always been a fighter. Don't let anyone take that from you." Her words offered a sliver of comfort, though they didn't erase the pain. Marcus took on extra shifts, working long hours to keep his mind occupied. The monotony of the job provided a strange solace. The clinking of dishes, the hum of the kitchen, and the occasional friendly banter with customers became a temporary escape from his thoughts. In the quiet moments between shifts, Marcus reflected on his life. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to believe in the power of kindness and hard work. Her voice echoed in his mind. "The world may not always be fair, son, but that doesn't mean you stop being good." Even in his darkest moments, Marcus couldn't let go of his fundamental belief in the goodness of people. He started volunteering at a local community center, helping tutor underprivileged kids. The children's laughter and unfiltered joy became a source of healing for him. They didn't care about his past or his pain. They saw him as someone who cared for them. Despite his efforts to move forward, the wound Emily had inflicted remained raw. On sleepless nights, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. The humiliation he had felt wasn't just personal. It was a reminder of the systemic prejudices that defined his life. Yet within his pain, a quiet resilience began to grow. Marcus realized that he couldn't let the cruelty of others define his worth. Slowly but surely, he started to rebuild himself. Not for the world, but for his own survival and dignity. His kindness, though tested, remained unwavering. When he saw a homeless man shivering in the cold, he gave away his own coat without hesitation. When an elderly neighbor struggled with groceries, Marcus carried her bags up 3 flights of stairs. These small acts of compassion reminded him of who he was at his core, a man who refused to let the world harden his heart. Months passed, and while the pain didn't fully disappear, Marcus found a semblance of peace. He wasn't ready to return to the university, but he hadn't given up on his education entirely. He started saving whatever he could, determined to continue his studies when the time felt right. Little did he know, his journey of isolation and introspection was preparing him for a moment that would not only test his character, but redefine his purpose. Months had passed since Marcus left the university, but the memory of that fateful day lingered like a scar. One evening, after finishing his shift at the diner, he sank into his couch, scrolling absent-mindedly through social media. Amidst the usual stream of posts and pictures, one update caught his eye. It was from Emily. The post was raw and urgent, starkly different from the curated images of luxury and perfection she usually shared. Her words were frantic. "My father is critically ill. His liver is 90% damaged and the doctors say he won't survive without a transplant. Please, I beg anyone who can help us." Marcus stared at the screen, his chest tightening. Her desperation was evident, each word dripping with anguish. Accompanying the post was a photo of Emily sitting by her father's hospital bed. The man, who had once been a towering figure of strength and success, now looked frail and vulnerable. Machines beeped around him, tubes snaking across his body. Despite their differences, Marcus couldn't ignore the pang of empathy he felt. He knew what it was like to feel helpless, to watch someone you care about suffer. For a moment he saw not Emily, the privileged girl who had humiliated him, but a daughter desperately fighting to save her father. Curious, Marcus scrolled through the comments beneath the post. Most were sympathetic, but offered little beyond words. "So sorry to hear this, Emily. Praying for you and your family. Hope you find a donor soon." Emily had tagged several of their former classmates, many of whom had ignored the post entirely. Those who responded expressed their regrets, but gave excuses, work commitments, health concerns, or simply an unwillingness to take such a personal risk. The silence from her wealthier peers was deafening. Marcus realized that, for all her privilege, Emily had found herself in a position where money and status could not buy salvation. For the next few days, the post stayed with him. He found himself revisiting it, rereading her words and feeling the weight of her plea. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to tell himself that it wasn't his problem. After all, this was the same woman who had humiliated him in front of an entire classroom, reducing him to tears and driving him away from his dreams. But another part of him, the part that refused to let bitterness consume him, couldn't turn away. Marcus had been raised to believe in compassion, even for those who had wronged him. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Son, kindness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it." That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Emily's father, a man he had never met, and the pain Emily must have been feeling. He thought about the injustice of the world, where someone like him, poor, marginalized, and overlooked, might be the only one willing to step forward. The decision wasn't easy, but by morning Marcus knew what he had to do. Without telling anyone, he called the hospital listed in Emily's post and inquired about becoming a liver donor. The process was rigorous and required extensive testing, but Marcus approached it with quiet determination. He didn't need recognition or gratitude, he only needed to do what felt right. As the days went by, Marcus underwent the necessary medical evaluations. The doctors were astonished by his selflessness when they learned his story. "You understand this is a major surgery," one of them cautioned. "Why are you doing this for someone you don't even know personally?" Marcus hesitated before replying, his voice steady. "Because it's the right thing to do." Unbeknownst to Emily, the answer to her desperate plea had come from the most unexpected place. Marcus, the man she had humiliated and cast aside, was about to give her family a second chance at life. The decision Marcus made was not one of pride or obligation, but of compassion and humanity. He had no desire for recognition, no interest in mending a personal grudge, and no expectations for gratitude. His heart ached for Emily's pain, even if she had once been the source of his own. Marcus believed deeply that the value of a person was not in their wealth or skin color, but in the strength of their character. Quietly, he reached out to the hospital mentioned in Emily's post. During the initial call, Marcus explained his intent to donate a portion of his liver to Emily's father. The nurse on the other end paused, stunned by his willingness to undergo such a serious procedure for a stranger. When Marcus confirmed that he wished to remain anonymous, her voice softened. "You're doing something remarkable," she said. The weeks that followed were filled with medical evaluations. Marcus underwent countless tests, blood work, imaging scans, and consultations with specialists to determine if he was a match for the transplant. Each appointment reminded him of the gravity of his decision. This wasn't just a kind gesture, it was a sacrifice of his own health and comfort. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" one of the doctors asked him during a pre-surgical consultation. "This isn't an easy recovery. There are risks involved." "I'm sure," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "If I can help save a life, it's worth it." The day of the surgery arrived. Marcus walked into the hospital alone, carrying only a small bag of essentials. He hadn't told anyone, not his co-workers, not his friends, not even Ms. Lorraine at the diner. This was a personal act, one he wanted to carry out without fanfare. As he lay on the hospital bed, waiting to be taken into the operating room, Marcus thought of his mother. He imagined her pride, her gentle smile, and the way she used to tell him, "When you have the chance to make the world a little better, take it." The surgery was long and complex, but it was successful. The portion of Marcus's liver was transplanted into Emily's father, and his condition stabilized. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to breathe. Her father had been given a second chance. A miracle, the doctors told her, made possible by an anonymous donor. "Who was it?" Emily asked, her voice filled with gratitude and curiosity. "I'm afraid we can't tell you," the doctor replied gently. "The donor wished to remain anonymous, but whoever they are, they've given your father a new lease on life." Emily was overcome with emotion. She had spent sleepless nights pleading for help, reaching out to everyone she knew, only to be met with silence or excuses. That someone, a stranger, had stepped forward filled her with both relief and a deep sense of humility. Meanwhile, Marcus recovered in a separate wing of the hospital, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines. The pain was significant, but he bore it without complaint. He found comfort in knowing that his sacrifice had saved a life. In the days following the surgery, Marcus was discharged and returned to his modest apartment. The hospital honored his wish to remain anonymous, and Emily remained unaware of the identity of the man who had changed her family's fate. For Marcus, the act was never about acknowledgement. It was about doing what he believed was right. He carried on with his life quietly, finding strength in the knowledge that he had lived up to the values his mother had instilled in him. Little did he know his silent act of sacrifice would soon come to light in a way that neither he nor Emily could have anticipated. Emily couldn't shake the mystery of her father's anonymous donor. She replayed the doctor's words in her mind. Someone with a remarkable heart stepped forward to save him. Gratitude consumed her, but so did curiosity. Who could have made such a selfless sacrifice, and why would they choose to remain anonymous? Determined to uncover the truth, Emily began her search. She reached out to the hospital, hoping for a clue, but confidentiality laws prevented them from revealing any details. Still, she pressed on, contacting classmates and acquaintances, desperate for leads. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. A nurse, moved by Emily's earnestness, gave her a cryptic hint. "I can't tell you who," she said softly, "but I can tell you that this donor didn't act out of obligation or wealth. They acted out of compassion." The words struck a chord with Emily. Compassion? It was a quality she had rarely considered, and yet it now seemed to define the person she owed everything to. As she reflected on her past interactions, a thought began to gnaw at her. Could it have been someone she had wronged? Someone she had overlooked? Her heart sank as her mind turned to Marcus. The memory of her cruel rejection of him resurfaced vividly. She had dismissed him so easily, judging him not by his character, but by his appearance and circumstances. What if Marcus, the man she had humiliated, was the one who had saved her father? Emily dug deeper, asking mutual acquaintances about Marcus. She learned that he had left the university shortly after their encounter, retreating to a modest life in the same neighborhood where he had grown up. The timeline aligned too closely to ignore. Finally, summoning her courage, Emily set out to find Marcus. After asking around his neighborhood, she found herself standing in front of a small, weathered apartment building. Her heart pounded as she knocked on the door. Marcus opened it, surprised to see her. He was thinner than she remembered, and his eyes bore the weight of someone who had faced immense challenges. For a moment, they stood in silence, the past hanging heavily between them. Then, unable to hold back her emotions, Emily dropped to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she clasped her hands together, her voice trembling. "It was you, wasn't it? You saved my father." Marcus froze, unsure of how to respond. He had never intended for her to find out. "I was blind," Emily continued, her sobs breaking through her words. "I judged you by your skin, by your circumstances, and I was so wrong. You saved my father's life when no one else would. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it." Marcus stepped back, overwhelmed by the moment. He had imagined this confrontation many times, but hearing her words now felt surreal. He had long accepted that he might never hear an apology from Emily, and yet here she was, not just apologizing, but humbling herself before him. "You didn't have to do this," Emily said, her voice thick with guilt. "You owed me nothing. I treated you horribly, and yet you showed me a kind of humanity I didn't deserve." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't do it for you, Emily. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Your father's life mattered, and it wasn't my place to decide otherwise, no matter what happened between us." His words cut through her like a blade, not out of anger, but out of truth. Emily nodded, tears still flowing. "You've taught me something I'll never forget. It's not the color of someone's skin or the size of their bank account that defines them. It's their heart. And yours, Marcus, is the most beautiful I've ever known." She stood slowly, wiping her tears. "I can never undo what I did to you, but I want to make things right. Please let me try." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "Making things right isn't about making me feel better. It's about changing how you see the world. If you've truly learned something, show it through your actions, not just your words." Emily nodded again, understanding the depth of his statement. She left that day with a changed heart, determined to honor the lesson Marcus had taught her. Marcus, meanwhile, remained humble and steadfast, never seeking recognition for his actions. To him, being a hero wasn't about glory. It was about living by principles of kindness and integrity. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Forgiving Emily was no simple act. It required him to confront the pain she had caused and to rise above it. Yet, his heart had always leaned toward compassion. He took a deep breath, looked into her tearful eyes and said, "Hate only breeds more hate. What matters is that we learn and grow. I forgive you." Emily broke into fresh sobs, her guilt mingled with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the harm I've done. Not just to you, but to anyone I've ever judged unfairly." But Marcus's forgiveness wasn't just for her benefit. It was also for himself. He understood that holding on to anger would only weigh him down. Forgiveness was his way of freeing himself from the chains of the past. Emily, true to her word, began to share their story. She posted on social media about the extraordinary kindness Marcus had shown, confessing the prejudice and cruelty she had once held in her heart. "He saved my father's life," she wrote, "and in doing so, he saved mine too. He showed me what real humanity looks like." The post went viral, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and the power of forgiveness. The community that had once turned a blind eye to Marcus's struggles now rallied behind him. Local news outlets picked up the story, celebrating him as a hero who had transcended the boundaries of prejudice to act with unparalleled grace. People began to approach Marcus, some to thank him, others to apologize for their own complicity in the biases he had faced. Marcus accepted their gratitude and apologies with humility, insisting, "I didn't do this to be a hero. I did it because it was right." Emily, inspired by Marcus's example, transformed her life. She became an advocate for equality and justice, dedicating herself to educating others about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of empathy. She started speaking at schools and community events, often with Marcus by her side. Together, they shared their story, a story of pain, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit. Over time, their bond deepened. Emily's sincerity and newfound commitment to change earned Marcus's trust. Though their journey had begun in pain, it evolved into a partnership rooted in respect and shared purpose. As the years passed, Marcus became a symbol of resilience and love, not just in his community, but far beyond. His name was spoken with admiration, his story serving as a reminder that the beauty of the heart always transcends the color of the skin. In the end, Marcus's legacy wasn't just in the life he had saved, but in the hearts he had touched and the barriers he had helped to break. He showed the world that true strength lies in kindness, and that forgiveness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds.